and we look after Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, and that kind of part of the country. And our mission is to connect people with Parkinson's to research. So if I can move on to the next slide, please, Catherine. So basically, we've got a call about anxiety and Parkinson's. We are recording the call, so it will be available for replay afterwards. I don't think people's cameras should appear on the recording, but if anyone was particularly not wanting to appear, bear that in mind. The call is being recorded, and the slides will be made available. They've been available before the call, they'll be available after the call as well. We will be taking questions at the end, but we're taking questions using the Zoom Q&A text function, which means you can enter questions at any time during the call, and they'll be dealt with at the end of the call. We can't guarantee to answer everything, but we'll have a good crack at it. So questions as you go through will be dealt with at the end. There'll be a short break as well after the talk before we deal with the questions. The other caveat it's worth putting out is that nothing you see on this call is meant as health advice. So we're talking about healthcare subjects, but you shouldn't make any sort of healthcare decision based purely on what you see here. The Parkinson's UK helpline is there as a sort of support at any time if you like it, and the numbers on the screen. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So our speaker for today about anxiety is Dr. Katherine Deane. Now, Katherine may look familiar to a few of you. She's been a good friend of Parkinson's UK for many years, has done a lot of work with us, including notably the prioritization exercise that was done a few years ago that delivered the top 10 priorities for that people with Parkinson's care about in research. I know Katherine will talk about that. So she's published extensively. She works at University of East Anglia in Norwich, which makes her part of our patch in the East. And she has published extensively, and judging by our publications list, she's a fan of open access publication, which I think is a really good thing for all of us because it means we can read her work. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you across to Katherine Deane, who will talk about anxiety and Parkinson's.
Thanks very much. I absolutely thank you so much for inviting me to here today. You are the first people to hear this talk, and I have to hugely thank you for inviting me to do that, because that's allowed me to write the paper in a way that I hope makes sense to people and stuff. So we're literally within a week or two of submitting this paper to Movement Disorders Journal, and this has been incredibly helpful to sort all of this out. So who am I? I'm Katherine. I'm a biologist by training, so those caveats about no clinical advice being given, double whammy with me. I'm afraid I'm not even a clinician to give any advice.
Katherine, I've muted everyone except you'll have to unmute. Thank you. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Right, let me re-go at this. So I'm just Katherine. I'm a biologist by training, so all those caveats about clinical advice is definitely double whammy for me. But I also have disabilities myself. I have what's called a functional movement disorder. So if we think of you guys with Parkinson's, with cells going into disrepair, that's sort of a hardware fault if we think on the computer. Mine's a software fault. My cells are perfectly happy and healthy. They just signals in a sucky manner. So I end up with slow walking, shaking, fatigue and brain fog, occasional anxiety and depression gremlins come and kick me. So you could see I do have a bit of insight into what it is that you guys have, but I absolutely acknowledge I do not have Parkinson's. I have something similar, but it gives me enough insight to go, I got to ask you guys about your expertise about stuff. I've been a wheelchair user for the last 10 years, but I've had this for 22. So long-termer. I know how important the psychosocial aspects are in any long-term condition. I know that they're there from day one, as Michael J. Fox says, and he said, you know, being diagnosed with Parkinson's, it's frightening, it's lonely, and it can be isolating. So when we're looking at it, it isn't just slow, stiff and shaky and we've got drugs that can deal with that. It's kind of, no, let's deal with this holistically and really identify what's going on. So as mentioned, I did the research with Parkinsons UK and the James Linds Alliance to identify the top 10 research priorities for the management of Parkinson's. We did an assumed top priority of everybody wants to cure this, but after that, what would we be doing to prioritize in terms of the management side of things? And we asked over 1,000 people affected by Parkinson's, patients, carers, clinicians. We excluded people like me, the researchers. We've had many, many years of being able to say what we wanted to research. We decided we needed to hear from you guys as to what needed to be done. And we said, you know, it's a two-stage survey. First stage said, what do you want researching? And the second stage said, we've got all of these ideas. What are your top 10? And the final meeting in person agreed the final top 10. And the top 10 is this: balance and falls, stress, uncontrollable movements, personalized treatments, dementia, mild thinking and memory problems, monitoring symptoms, sleep, dexterity, and urinary problems. But as you can see, stress and anxiety is way up there at number 2, and it was really a high priority right from the get-go. So many people were saying, we want this researched. And so many people said, yeah, no, this is a really high priority. So what's anxiety? What's stress? And the best kind of definitions that we can give are sort of fairly vague. It's a feeling of unease, worry, a fear, the heart races, you feel sweaty, shaky, short of breath. We acknowledge that everybody feels anxious from time to time, and it usually passes over after a given situation is over. So public speaking might be for you an anxiety generating thing. Once you've done it, that's it, done, over, and you're feeling better. But if it lasts long term, it can start to change your behavior, and it can start to make you feel overly careful or avoiding things that trigger your anxieties. And the worries can be out of proportion to relatively harmless situations. So you know that a spider is never going to be a life-threatening force to you, but your anxiety gremlins aren't quite so sure about it. And long term, it interferes with everyday life and relationships. So anxiety is a pest. And what we've got is that we know that anxiety levels in Parkinson's actually can vary with the medication on and off states. So as you go off, the anxiety levels can rise. And we don't quite know why that is, but some of it might be very practical. As I go off, I start freezing more. I'm worried I'll fall more, things like that. What we do know is that anxiety affects a large proportion of people with Parkinson's. A third of people with Parkinson's get anxiety at some point in their disease course. It often happens with depression, so coexists with depression about half the time. So it's a real pest. But what we found interesting when we looked at it was we found that about a third of the anxiety was classified as not otherwise specified. So we had the generalized anxiety, we had the anxieties in response to specific things, the phobias, we had the anxiety, the social anxiety, we had all sorts of, you know, specific things that the psychologists understood about and could describe and could treat. And then they put a whole load of you guys in a bucket going, other. And we went, hang on, isn't that important? Shouldn't we know about that? And they went, oh, it's just other anxiety. And we went, we think that might be important to know about. We think that might be a Parkinson's specific anxiety, for example. But we certainly should understand it better. It's a third of our patients. And we do know that anxiety has very large impact on quality of life. One of the other things we found way back in 2013 was that at the time, when we did that priority setting partnership project, we had no definitive trials of treatments for anxiety and Parkinson's. Very, very limited evidence. And even today, we still don't have any fully powered, good sized numbers, large size numbers, randomized controlled trials of therapies for anxiety and Parkinson's. A thing that I find particularly annoying is sort of, guys, we should at least have gone out there with the drugs that we know work for anxiety and other conditions, and at least double check that they're okay for you guys and don't aggravate the Parkinson's symptoms and all of the rest of it. But no, we haven't done it. So we think the Parkinson's medications themselves might help and have positive impact. We're not sure how. They might have impact directly. They might be directly impacting on the anxiety, or they might control symptoms better so you're less anxious about them. But we also know that there are some studies out there about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, a talking therapy, and that might be helpful. But again, no big studies, no definitive evidence. But there's other psychology models out there that also may be good. So acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, may also be helpful. We just don't know. So I got the very wonderful Daniel working with me. He was doing his clinical psychology doctorate. Now he has to do a research project as part of that, professional doctorate. And we were incredibly lucky to get two fabulous lay advisors on our study steering group, Bob Chalmers and Jackie Mallion, who are in the Norwich area, and they've got Parkinson's disease and they both struggled with anxiety at various times with it. So they were so key in making sure that our survey made sense and that everybody could understand it. And our first brainstorming survey went out and it said, tell us about your anxiety. Tell us what triggers it. Tell us your thoughts you have when you have it. Tell us what you do, what your behaviors look like when you have it. Tell us about your physical sensations. Tell us about your emotions. Tell us, tell us, tell us. And brilliantly, we got loads of people telling us, over 200 people told us about their anxiety. And then we said, okay, we've got a second survey for you now. We've got 137 of these statements that are unique, represent everything that everybody's told us about. Rank them. Tell us, does this reflect your experience of anxiety? From never all the way up to always. Does this statement agree with your experience of the impact of the anxiety? Strongly disagree, all the way up to strongly agree. And that helped us generate a lot of results. Now, the first thing we had to do was really explain to you the sorts of things that we were getting. So in the brainstorming survey, we'd get statements like this, brilliant statements. It affects my breathing. I tend to avoid going out to meet people. I avoid social situations. I start thinking people are looking at me when it makes my symptoms worse. Dyskinesias. When it kicks in, it increases. The anxiety will last until I take myself out of the situation. It has a big effect. I try not to think about it, but I have been known to fake feeling ill and not go out. I hate the thought that people will look at me. I think you'll agree there's just a few issues in there that we've got to unpick. So the unpicking is this sort of thing. So we would code it all the way through. We'd say, it affects my breathing. That's a fight or flight response. I tend to avoid going out. That's avoiding social situations. And as you can see, we'd start to put them into bundles with that original phrasing, with the original text from the patients, so that we knew that when we got to the eventual statements, we were absolutely responding to what was going on. So we had a whole bundle of statements under toileting. And we said, okay, what the two key issues here are. I worry about the embarrassment of having a toileting accident, being incontinent, and I'm embarrassed by the frequency and urgency of which I need to urinate. And that covered all the statements in that bundle of toileting. So we were really trying to make sure we covered absolutely everything and were really fair about it. So once we prioritized, we ended up with having 102 of those statements that had moderate to large impact or frequency. So they were at the positive end of our Likert scales, of our 5-point scales. So we had 32 items 32 statements about thoughts, 30 about triggers, 14 behaviors, 7 physical sensations, 8 emotions, 11 impacts, and a partridge in a pear tree. So, you know, we had a lot going on. This is the largest survey in the world looking at anxiety in Parkinson's. We blow everything else out of the water by about tenfold, I'm afraid. So nobody else has really talked to people about this in any in-depth way. And what we found, as you can see, is the large majority of the experiences around anxiety were directly related to or exacerbated by Parkinson's. Other stuff was unrelated, so sort of really generic anxiety, anybody would have this. But we had most of it was Parkinson's related. We think that might have an impact on how you'd address the therapy. So we've got the generic anxiety. I try to distract myself from the anxiety. That's a generic thing. Everybody with anxiety has a tendency to try to do that. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people with anxiety would think that. We've got things of a direct link to Parkinson's. I worry about when I see other people at the later stage of Parkinson's. And when we had things that were exacerbated by Parkinson's, if people are too close and I feel my movement is restricted. Now, as a psychologist, you go in and go, oh, that's fear of being in public, social judgment, or, you know, agoraphobia, those sorts of things. And we go, yeah, but also the Parkinson's, fear of falling, fear of freezing, fear of judgment. And they go, oh, there's a bit more. And we go, yeah, it's a bit more. So we had a lot of emotions and they seemed very common to anxiety. In other words, emotionally, anxiety feels like anxiety. It doesn't matter whether you've got Parkinson's or not. Feeling overwhelmed, nervous, upset, angry, all of those sorts of things are anxiety. Everybody feels anxiety about the same way. And the physical symptoms are also quite generic until you start saying, but could those be mistaken for Parkinson's? And then you go, oh, yes, actually, most of those are also Parky symptoms. Ah, right. So when you're struggling with your anxiety and your Parkinson's symptoms get worse because the drugs are wearing off, do you assign that to Parkinson's or do you say my anxiety is getting worse? You can see how easy it would be to confuse the two. And in fact, how easy it would be for the symptoms of one to aggravate the symptoms of the other. So yeah, we're getting into complexity here. Behaviors. And we were saying a lot of the behaviors have an overlay, are impacted by the Parkinson's symptoms. So there's a lot of safety seeking. I plan things in great detail, including how to get out of a situation quickly. I prefer to be accompanied by someone familiar when I'm going to new places. There's avoidance behaviors. I avoid busy, crowded places. In public, I select food or drink that's easier to manage, or I avoid eating or drinking altogether. I avoid decision-making or positions of responsibility. So you can see that these are things that absolutely a psychologist would go, this is a very typical anxiety behavior. And you're going, yeah, but the Parkinson's adds its own flavor to all of these statements. Thoughts and triggers sort of overlap rather a lot, and these are the biggest bundles. And again, a lot of linkage to the Parkinson's, and we've got big themes: meta-worry, catastrophizing, negative comparisons to past abilities, fear of social judgment, and fear of failure. So meta-worry, what do we mean about meta-worry? Worrying about worrying, which is a pest. And everyone that gets anxiety goes, I really hate it when my brain just goes into a loop and I'm just worrying about the fact that I'm worrying. And I know this is not helpful, but I can't seem to stop this. So this is a really common thing, but again, this is overlaid by the Parkinson's thing. So I worry about feeling anxious, how long it will last for, well, it will impact my health, how I will cope with it. But it's also, I worry about upsetting those close to me, making things difficult for them. Catastrophization, I blow things out of proportion and I make mountains out of molehills. Negative comparisons to past abilities and others' abilities. So things that trigger my anxiety is when I'm not able to perform a task or a role that I previously would have been able to. Or thoughts, I compare my health status to those who are in better health. You can see how all of those would trigger and compound anxiety. There's fear of social judgment. I worry about how others will perceive my Parkinson's symptoms and that they'll judge me negatively. I can't say how many people with Parkinson's I've met who've said, I really worry about the tremor and that I'll be judged as an alcoholic, that I've got the DTs rather than a Parkinson's. I worry about the embarrassment of having a toileting accident, becoming incontinent. God, yeah. When I'm in a social situation, I might be triggered for my anxiety, particularly one where I think I'm being observed or evaluated, such as speaking in public, meeting new people. Fear of failure. I worry I will lose control. I'll not be able to do my everyday tasks. The trigger when I don't meet those demands or expectations. All of these things compound and exacerbate the anxiety that someone's feeling. All of these things have aspects of Parkinson's that informs those. However, we had this response, and it was only one response in the first survey, but it was so landed upon by so many people in the second survey. They went, yeah, that, exactly. Isn't anxiety just sometimes a proportionate and rational response to the difficulties I experience with my Parkinson's? In other words, this isn't necessarily something that should be pathologized. Sometimes life sucks. Parkinson's can suck. Shouldn't I be allowed to be a bit anxious about this? Absolutely. It's just, if it gets in the way, can we help? And can we help in a useful way? So I like I said, when I saw this response, I thought, yes, nailed it. Absolutely. This is not necessarily that this is a bad thing or that we shouldn't ever be anxious. This is just sort of saying, yeah, but when those gremlins get into being too much of a pest, can we help in a useful way? Can we make something important? And we really noticed that there was this bidirectionality. It went both ways between the anxiety and the Parkinson's. So when I have difficulty with my movement or my coordination, when I have tremor, when I am tired, when I have difficulty with my sexual performance, all of those things worked both ways. So sometimes the Parkinson's was triggering it, and then they got the anxiety, and then the anxiety would trigger more of the symptoms of the Parkinson's. You know yourselves, when you're a bit more anxious, you shake a bit more. Hell, everybody does. It's just that you guys have got Parkinson's on top of that, and the shakes are a little more exciting. And I wrote down all of the impact statements because what I really wanted to highlight was this is incredibly important for us to offer effective therapeutic options on, because this is impacting on people's lives in a really large way. And we haven't taken it seriously enough up to date, and we really need to shift it. It's restricted me and impacted on my freedom and independence. It's made my Parkinson's symptoms worse. It's impacted on my sleep, my relationships. It's made me more isolated. It's harder to complete daily tasks. It's hard to think clearly. It's impacted my confidence. It's made me hard for me to express myself. It's impacted my ability to work. It's impacted my ability to be an effective parent or carer for those who need my support. This is important. We have to address this much better than we currently do therapeutically, because those impacts are important to address. We need to be supporting you guys better. Now, the survey obviously identifies the most commonly experienced symptoms, and each person's anxiety experience is unique to them. So if you're looking at this and going, well, they didn't mention this, A, I haven't given you the full list of everything that we found, but B, it might just be that that is relatively unique to you. But equally, these are the common stuff. And even this has not been described in the literature up to now. What we have identified is anxiety does feel like anxiety to everybody. And that there are aspects that are common with generic anxiety, and that should be regarded as a positive, because that gives us treatment options. The psychologists go, oh, avoidance behaviors, we know how to deal with that. We can do some positive stuff about that. And you're going, great. However, can we make sure that you know about the Parkinson's symptoms? Because that therapy must have some knowledge about Parkinson's, because that overlay of the symptoms is so important to how people are understanding their symptoms, why they are being triggered, what they are doing in response to them. The data does support and expand a model of a cognitive behavioral model of anxiety and depression in Parkinson's. And I apologize for the complexity of this slide, but this is Egan's model. And basically, the bits that are in bold are the data that we added in, because they just did it from a theoretical perspective. And we came in and went, oh yeah, we found data for this. So we actually reinforced most of their model, but we also expanded it a bit and we added a bit. So they were, for example, saying avoidance and social isolation feeds into depression. And we went, oh, it also feeds into anxiety. It's also doing that. So we enhanced the model and made it. And again, a lot of this is really useful, because if the guys that are doing the therapies have a model, they can really structure the therapy in an intelligent way, so that they don't need to know immediately what's triggering you. They need to know how to deal with it. And they've got a model. It works better, I promise. And Moss Morris has also looked and said, you know what? Long-term conditions and people that have them, they always have a huge amount of overlap of symptoms and ideas and anxiety. And there's a lot of common themes there. Adjustment to diagnosis. It was worse in the period just of my diagnosis of Parkinson's. How many times have we heard that? Worry about coping with progression. I worry at the rate at which my Parkinson's symptoms progress and how I will cope at their worst. People worry about how their friends and family will cope. I worry about becoming a burden, or when loved ones get upset. Worry about the impact of anxiety behaviors on friends and families. I prefer to be accompanied by someone familiar when I'm going into new places or situations. All of those came up in our survey. All of those come up in a lot of other long-term conditions. And again, this is a positive, because we've got therapy structures, we've got therapy ideas that actually work for this stuff. So we're not starting with a blank canvas. We're starting with a canvas that's got a fair degree of population, but what it doesn't have is the Parkinson's color palette. And we're going, that's important, because that color overlays a lot of everything else that's going on. So our anxiety model is anxiety feels the same for everyone. Doesn't matter if you've got Parkinson's or something else, anxiety is anxiety, but it has a negative impact. And in long-term conditions, there are common issues between people with Parkinson's and other long-term conditions. But anxiety in Parkinson's is really interlinked with Parkinson's symptoms, and this can lead to a confusion of cause. Am I feeling tight because I'm anxious, or tight because I'm rigid and I need to take my pills? Aggravation of symptoms. I'm feeling anxious, so my tremor's gone on an absolute blinder and I'm feeling awful. Or is it directly caused by the Parkinson's, a response to the Parkinson's? So I have this really awful, it's not a fun diagnosis to get. And so inevitably I'm feeling anxious, or the specific symptoms are triggering my anxiety. And we have a strong suspicion that there is an overlap of Parkinson's with mood problems, with anxiety and depression. They're in a similar zone of the brain. So we're sort of looking at it and going, oh, there might be some biology there. And again, that's great for therapeutic options. So not immediately, but longer term, there may be stuff that we can be doing. One of the things that we could see again and again was it has a massive impact that the symptoms of Parkinson's really were impacting on the symptoms of anxiety. And one of the things I know from other pieces of work that I've done is that medication adherence, sticking to taking the drugs the way you're supposed to maximize the control, and that includes with the variations allowed with that your clinical team know about, so sort of it's an off day and then just really not working, I can take an extra dose or whatever, all of that, but sticking with those protocols is really complex and blooming difficult. And if you're not able to stick with them well, if you haven't had the training, if you don't have the skills and the equipment and all the rest of it, then your symptoms will get worse. And then that might trigger your anxiety, or your anxiety might trigger more symptoms. Oh, hang on. What if we got on top of your adherence to your pills, and that might help get on top of at least some of the anxiety? We know that a single missed dose in the morning can impact the whole day. It just never quite catches up. And it's very complex. You've got all your pill boxes, your pre-packet prescriptions, but yeah, like I say, there is actually a therapy for this. It does work. But also we know that you don't live in isolation. There's friends, there's family, and if they have improved knowledge, if they can support coping techniques, if they can assist with keeping on top of the pills, that could be an incredibly effective way of supporting someone with Parkinson's and anxiety to get better on top of their symptoms. So next steps in research. The really cool thing is, because we've got so many people responding and we've got such a rich database, we're now able to start picking it apart and go, does the sort of anxiety you have vary if you're tremor dominant versus rigidity dominant? We don't know. Nobody does. But we do know that those two forms of Parkinson's do have different characteristics, both biologically and psychologically. And we're kind of going, oh, that might be important to look at and you know, again, explore what's going on biologically. But what we're also definitely going to do is create a measure that describes Parkinson's anxiety. We've got good measures that diagnose anxiety because, well, anxiety feels like anxiety. So the diagnostic tools are very short, 8 questions long and that sort of thing. And I've got no problem with them at all. I think they're great. I think they really do. I do what they say on the tin. They diagnose anxiety. But what they don't do is tell the therapist what areas you need to work on. And so we're going to create a measure that helps them with that. We'd love to get to a point where we can co-create therapies, working with people with Parkinson's and their family and carers, looking at how we design therapies that really address these issues. And of course, we would run randomized controlled trials to evaluate the efficacy. So just to finish up with, thanks to all the people with Parkinson's, their carers, and for all of their insights and expertise, to all the medics and therapists who also shared their expertise, Parkinson's UK, because without the research interest network and access to all of you guys, this project would never have got off the ground. Obviously, huge thanks to the specific team that's been working on this. Daniel, my clinical psychology student, Bob and Jackie, our lay advisors, Kat, my psychology colleague, and Charlotte, who happens to be Daniel's wife and is coming through the course a year behind him. So she's the one that's going to be doing the analysis of which groups link with what other data and stuff. So that's going to be fun. There's a few references, and I think most of those are open access. If you have any problems getting hold of them and you want them, just email me and I'll send them off to you. That's my email address. And also, because I know that you guys are often involved in lots of other things in life, should you be involved in the museums or shops or pretty much anything, and want to know how you reopen your venue after COVID lockdowns in a safe but also accessible manner, I wrote a few guidances because I kind of noticed that the government forgot about us disabled people, and I didn't think that that was acceptable, and it is complex. So I wrote a bit of guidance on that. So we're going to have a brief break, about 5 minutes, and then I'll be back to answer all of your questions. Thank you so much for your attention and time.
Thank you very much. And I noticed that although we said there should be a Q&A window, it's in fact a chat box. So as Liz says, if you've got any questions, if you could type them into the chat box, and after a couple of minutes break, we'll start dealing with those. So maybe it's time to get started on some of the questions. So the first one I can answer is that there will be a recording of the session available afterwards. So it will be linked from the RIGeast website, which is RIGeast.uk, and also from the Parkinsons UK website. So yes, there will be a recording of this. And a few comments in there that echo my view that this was an excellent presentation. It's been really clear. So a few questions. What are the best medications for anxiety that will not cause a problem with Parkinson's drugs?
Right. So the quick answer is we don't know. The longer answer is we do know that your own Parkinson's medications may have some benefits. So you want to get those optimal first, and you want to make sure that you're able to take them optimally. We don't believe that there is any negative interactions between anxiety pills and Parkinson's pills, but we also don't actually have much evidence in that area. So it's with a great deal of caution, but we know that the antidepressant pills don't have too much of a negative interaction. There were a few case studies, a few people across the world who did have some negative interactions. So it does happen, but it happens very rarely. It is not a regular occurrence with the antidepressant pills. I suspect that would be similar with the anti-anxiety pills, but on that score, we don't have any evidence, but we also don't have any of those case studies coming up. So nobody's spotted them yet. So in all likelihood, it's worth a try. And also always with drugs that are trying to shift mood, it is a case of you have to try one or two of them before you get the one that works right for you. They're not definitely everyone can take pill A and that will work. They are pills you have to work your way through a little bit to find the one that works best for you. So yes, sorry for the very vague answer, but we have very vague data.
Another one that came through was, given that we know that Parkinson's pathology starts years before the symptoms become obvious, is there any evidence that anxiety starts before PD? Again,
we don't have the data, but my strong suspicion would be yes, because we do have better data in the depression area, and there we are strongly suspicious that for some people their first symptom of Parkinson's is depression. Like I say, the areas of the brain that control mood, or one of the areas of the brain that controls mood, is very close to the motor zone of the brain, which is affected by the Parkinson's. So it makes sense biologically that those two zones might interact. So yes, the likelihood is, yeah, probably a bit, but probably also not for everybody.
So,
sorry, I can't find the chat box on my iPad.
Go on.
Can anxiety show sort of a few years before you actually get Parkinson's?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, quite like I say, we know that there's a linkage there, but we haven't got any good data.
And then basically probably go away, but well, with treatment, with drugs you had, and then when you sort of have like a bereavement a few years later, it came back really badly. Yeah, so it seems very.
Yeah, and anxiety is a variable disorder. It is something that comes and goes with anybody that struggles with these gremlins. I certainly know that at the moment, with the joys of COVID, that the summer was not that much fun at times. I was definitely struggling with those anxiety gremlins at times. So yeah, it comes and goes, both with the illness, but also with the pressures of life. So yeah, that's normal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another one here. Are there any case studies into a chain reaction where anxiety in one person spreads to others in a group?
So yes, anxiety is contagious, and this is been built in by evolution. When we were on the plains, etc., if one person in your tribe thought they saw a saber-toothed tiger, they want everybody else in the tribe to be on high alert and anxious because there might be a saber-toothed tiger in the area. So that's been built into our neurology, into our pathways in our brains from a very, very early age, and had huge survival benefits. So it's really imprinted hard. So yes, if you have one person that's anxious, it tends to make the whole group more anxious. It's just built in, but that's normal. And that would be what I would call normal anxiety. This is an everyday, a trigger has happened, someone's very anxious about something, and sympathetically, you will feel more anxiety as a result. That's not the persistent form of anxiety that we're talking about more here. Hope that helps and hope that clarifies.
Again, thinking about drugs, if you don't want to take any medication, any Parkinson's medication, is there anything you can do about anxiety?
Oh, absolutely. You know, all of the talking therapies have got very good evidence for being effective for anxiety. And there is no good reason for saying it won't work for Parkinson's. In fact, there is some initial evidence, it's not strong, but there's some initial evidence to say things like cognitive behavioral therapy is effective in Parkinson's. What our project is just saying is it's probably helpful if those therapists also know about the Parkinson's side of life, to inform how they help you. Like I say, I've personally been struggling with anxiety, and I did do some telephone CBT with a therapist. Because she didn't know about my functional movement disorder and didn't know what it was and how I was managing it and everything like this, it felt there was this disjunct, there was this disconnect between my life and what she was talking about. And so I didn't feel the therapy was as effective as it could have been. And I strongly suspect that's the case for a lot of people with Parkinson's who seek therapy. But the basic tools probably do work. We're human. We all have human brains, and therefore techniques that are aimed at human brains probably do work. But if you've got techniques that are working better at a human brain with Parkinson's, that would be even better. So it's about improving what we've got, not saying that what we've got doesn't work. Probably does work, but it probably could be made to work better if we knew more and targeted it better.
Another one about drugs. Do you think any of the Parkinson's drugs can themselves increase anxiety?
We have no evidence to that effect, but, and it is a significant but, the only evidence we have is pretty indirect. So the only evidence we have that Parkinson's medications help with anxiety is when they were being used to treat people with depression in Parkinson's, and they happened to also measure anxiety. So it was kind of a byproduct finding rather than a definite direct finding. So there's a lot of cautions about interpreting that data. And yeah, we haven't gone and looked. So it's a valid question. The answer is I've not seen anything, but equally, I don't think we've asked the right questions always.
A couple of observations out there about people who found music therapy effective, or mindfulness therapy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why we're sort of going from saying, look, whilst we love cognitive behavior therapy and we know it's quite effective, we don't think it's the only tool you should have in your toolbox as a therapist or as an NHS. And things like music therapy, hell, even just going for a group walk on a regular basis, or doing yoga or singing, all of those things have been shown to have positive psychological impact on people. And Parkinson's, movement disorders, whatever else, first and foremost, we're people. So we're built to want to be with other people, to be doing activities with other people. That gives us lots of positive feedbacks and helps with all of the mood problems that we may be struggling with. So yeah, all of those things are hugely positive and should be being something that you do as, this helps me and I like it, so go with it.
Okay.
Catherine's Keith here. I've had a question sent to me directly, not open.
Yeah, go for it.
It's how can you get your doctor, who knows little about Parkinson's, to help you access these findings, especially if you're on your own? Is there a way you can bypass the GP?
Well, you can ask for your GP to refer you to a consultant, and preferably a consultant who has some knowledge of movement disorders. And usually the consultants will know better. And it is perfectly valid for you to request a referral to a consultant for doing that. It's also, you know, perfectly reasonable for you to contact Parkinson's UK, see if there's other routes for you to access the Parkinson's nurse specialist. Sometimes it's only via the consultants, but sometimes there's other routes into that service as well. And also whatever support the Parkinson's UK guys can offer. I think one of the challenges, and I really respect and acknowledge that this is really tough, is that we've been brought up with doctor knows best. And it's really tough psychologically to challenge that and go, actually, I'm not sure you know enough about my stuff. So take a deep breath, take a friend in with you, write it down and go in and say, yeah, I'd like somebody who really does know about this to talk about it with me, and to access this sort of stuff. The NICE guidelines have been revised, and they do state that psychological therapies are likely to be a good idea. So it's not like we're going against NHS guidance. It's just saying there isn't much evidence. That's not the same as saying it doesn't work. It's saying we haven't researched it properly. So yeah, it's perfectly valid to go and challenge your GP a little, but I do acknowledge that that can be quite tough to do.
Can I just also, I raised the point about music. My wife was experiencing serious anxiety, panic attacks, hyperventing, just after she was diagnosed.
Yeah.
The consultant said, we need a mild antidepressant, put venlafaxine into her, and that had absolutely the opposite effect, and worsened the situation, introduced dementia-like features. Took us 6 months to get off, and it was then that we discovered the benefit and efficacy of music. And now, even now, she's in a care home now, but when she's having a bad time, they just put the spa music on the headphones, and within minutes, it's just astonishing how quickly it works.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, think about it. With everybody going into lockdown and everything, what did everybody reach for immediately? The arts. They went and did stuff online and saw stuff that had been pre-recorded and everything. And there was a huge outreach for the arts, whether that was dance or music or other things, because that is how we feed our emotional souls. And so it is absolutely critical that we do the stuff that works for us. As you say, drugs come with side effects, don't always work, sometimes do work. And yeah, with the mood drugs, it always is a bit hit and miss as to what works and what doesn't work for you. But also, it is that case of We know that music is positive for mood. We know that going outside and getting green therapy, i.e. being outside, looking at the trees, looking at the wildlife, etc., is positive for us. We know being in a group is good for us, which is tough in COVID times, but even if it's a virtual group, that's still important. So all of these things are absolutely to be encouraged to be doing. You know, this is your positive resilience building. This is your positive feedback loops that help your whole system respond. And yes, music therapy is definitely an area which is known and does have some evidence in general. And yeah, we should be doing more research on it and working out how to tap into that better.
So we got one more here. I strongly believe that my Parkinson's developed from trauma in my early teens and how I dealt with it. Anxiety severely impacts my symptoms. Do you know if there's any studies into fight and flight response in Parkinson's?
Not that I'm aware of, but there might be. That you know, I'm not saying I'm the world's hugest expert on this area at the moment, but we definitely saw signs of fight or flight responses as part of the anxiety experience. So definitely people said I was freezing more. People said I was wanting to get the hell out of there, you know, planning to get the hell out of there even before they got into an anxiety generating situation. So yeah, fight or flight is in there. It's a strong component of the anxiety. Like I say, it's actually been built in as a survival mechanism right from the get-go. Fight or flight in terms of saber-toothed tiger is a brilliant response. Fight or flight in response to Boris doing yet another stupid statement on TV is not such a helpful response, although fight might be a good response, but there we go. But you know, this is how we're neurologically set up, and it doesn't really matter what the trigger is, the fight or flight response will kick in. And yes, that does seem to interact quite negatively with the Parkinson's symptoms, but in terms of specific research, no, I'm sorry, I don't know of any.
One more from somebody who was just going to clarify what type of study were you talking about? Was it a qualitative study of spoken reports of people with Parkinson's?
In relation to
the study you were talking about, was it a qualitative study of spoken reports?
Sorry, I'm just not sure in relation to which bit that I was talking about.
Okay, so any more questions? I'm just skimming through the list to see if we've missed anything. I think we've picked everything up.
I just noticed a question flash up saying, is there a shortage of Parkinson's consultants? There certainly is at our hospital.
Yes, unfortunately, there is a nationwide shortage of neurologists and geriatricians, and certainly a shortage of those with specialist knowledge. But that could be said of any area, I'm afraid. I believe the NHS is currently running at 100,000 medical staff, and that's nurses, physios, medics, etc. short. So the shortage is significant, but also that even when the NHS is running optimally, you know, we're fully staffed, we were running at high staff to patient ratios. So we run a lean and mean NHS, which at times means that we actually aren't running it with enough resource and times. And neurology is an area where there is ongoing pressure to the government about, certainly from Parkinson's UK and things like that, about saying, look, we've got a population that is aging. That's brilliant, because that means we're living longer and healthier lives for the most part. But we also need to have greater investment in the clinicians and their teams that can then cope with the diseases of old age, Parkinson's being one of them. So yes, the quick answer is, yeah, there is a shortage. We are very aware of it. And I know Parkinson's UK is doing a lot of campaigning on it.
Yes, yeah. We found like the consultant referred back to the mental health team, but the mental health team had already sent to the Parkinsons. You know, it's just going around in circles and you get absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, feel free to get angry at people. I think we're just too nice.
But they keep leaving. You can't get angry at them. They've gone.
Sometimes I think we're just too nice to people. I think every once in a while you shout at people and sort of go, no, I've been referred to them. Yes, no, I've seen them. They can't do anything. They haven't got the resource. So you are going to have to solve this.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're just about done. I don't know, is there a sort of two-line summary of very short sort of summation of what are the main takeaway points you would say from the presentation?
So from my presentation, what we can definitely say is anxiety feels like anxiety, but we can also say that Parkinson feeds into and overlays a lot of the anxiety. And so we need to make sure that we are optimally controlling the Parkinson's symptoms and that therapists understand Parkinson's so they can better understand your experience of anxiety in the context of Parkinson's. There is a lot of research that we are planning on doing with what data we already have, which is brilliant. But we will be coming back and we will be designing further projects to look at designing therapies and validating outcome measures and all sorts of things, really trying to get a better, more specific set of therapies that really work for this really pest of a symptom of Parkinson's.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just to echo some feedback that's coming through in the chat and certainly my own reaction, thank you very much. This has been a really excellent presentation in an important subject I think is under-researched. It's really good to see people with Parkinson's involved in the research from the beginning. Very much something that we want to do with the Research Support Network. And as we said before, open access publication. So you should see now on screen the feedback poll. We'd love to know what you think about how this presentation has gone, and give us your feedback on what's good, what's bad, and what you would like to hear about next, because we're looking to do more presentations like this, and if we ever get past COVID, we'll maybe even do some face-to-face and do some lab visits. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Katherine.
Thank you guys, really appreciated being invited.